but I'm in charge of sort of helping set policy and things for ILL here at the college. So thanks.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hi, I am Megan Gartland. I am the school library system coordinator at Jefferson Lewis BOCES.
Hey everyone, I'm Morgan Bond. I'm the resource sharing librarian at SUNY Oswego.
Okay, so we wanted to talk a little bit about regional ILL, specifically to the North Country. And some of the things that we wanted to talk about included what sort of resources everyone uses, what are people able to borrow, and how, and so what are the steps of requesting items that you in particular go through. So if anyone wants to start off with sort of an overview of what it looks like from your desk, feel free to go ahead.
I can talk a little bit, give an overview of what we do as a school system. So we actually belong to two systems. We have our what we call CITER is our interlibrary loan system among our school library system and the OHM and the MO BOCES school library systems. That tends to be our primary one, especially since it for with most of our schools being Opal schools, it's fully integrated with their Opals. So that one tends to be our primary. And then our secondary interlibrary loan system is Due North, which all systems in the North Country belong to. So that's when we need to get items from the public libraries or academic libraries. I know Due North is especially helpful to our high school librarians, and they tend to use it more heavily than our elementary school librarians. But we do expect all librarians to fully participate in Due North because interlibrary doesn't work unless everybody responds to ILL. We do an annual interlibrary loan training. This year, we actually offered a summer option and a fall option, knowing that we were going to run into some scheduling issues with this being a challenging school year and school districts having a shortage of substitute teachers. We thought we'd offer a summer and a fall option just to give people options that work for them. I can share a link to our interlibrary loan page here, and we put all of our helpful documents. So we have instructions for the schools, we have videos, we have links to all of our systems. So we have a section for delivery procedures because we want our schools to be able to find everything on this one page. So it's really one-stop shopping if they need to look up instructions, and then the school librarians can always contact the system for support. Angela Bartlett, who's in this session, but she's under my name because I shared the Zoom link. But Angela is really our interlibrary loan expert, and she really handles a lot of the support for the interlibrary loan in our system.
Thank you, Megan, for that overview. Morgan or Andrew, did you want to add to anything for the regional part?
I guess just here at Paul Smith's, we participate in OCLC's ILL for our borrowing and lending primarily, but we're also in Due North almost exclusively as a lender, so that we can make sure that our materials are available to everybody regionally.
At SUNY Oswego, we use kind of a mixture of different programs. So the SUNY system is using Alma as kind of our back end system. And then we also use Iliad as like a lender of last resort. So anything our patrons request that fails in Alma gets pushed to Iliad. And that's really where the bulk of our requests come in from other institutions. We do participate in Due North, mostly as a lender. I think we've only sent out a few requests ourselves through Due North. And I have one staff member right now, Judy Lupa, who does the heavy lifting in the department, and for student workers, I kind of jump in when things get a little difficult or if we have like some higher level borrowing requests on our end.
Right. Thank you, Morgan. And thank you, Andrew. The great beyond. So borrowing outside of the region, what are some of the steps that you take to answer those types of lending? Like what do you do to determine and who do you determine to go to for outside of a region ILL?
We use WorldShare, and we actually share WorldShare with St. Lawrence Lewis BOCES just because we weren't frequently using it. We do get requests that go through WorldShare, just not a lot. And those requests tend to be from our school libraries, and it tends to be when they're looking for a book in another language. Um, and those requests are rising. I'm hoping, budget permitting, we will be able to add some more books in other languages, especially Spanish is one that's really on the rise here. I'm hoping we'll be able to add some more Spanish titles to our Sora collection. Actually, we'll be getting some free Spanish titles in our Sora collection pretty soon here. But that tends to be the reason that we go to WorldShare is a lot of books in other languages, just because we don't have enough of those in our region. But I would like to change that by getting some more titles in our Sora. But it's been a really valuable resource for that purpose. And interlibrary loan is so important for books in other languages, just because students come and go. So just because you don't have a Spanish speaking student now doesn't mean you couldn't have one later. So interlibrary loan is really helpful because that is something that's constantly changing, is your number of students who need books in other languages. So ILL has been a really helpful resource for that.
We're also we're primarily a WorldShare library. We do most of our borrowing and lending through WorldShare, as I mentioned, and I think we look at borrowing from other institutions. We sort of try to do that on a geographic basis, and at ones that will lend to us at no cost when we're borrowing, and we'll talk about how we do that more later, I think. And so we also look at low cost and then at geographic proximity for physical items when we think that works as a proxy for the speed of the physical delivery through the mail system. If we're borrowing a book from Vermont, we assume it's going to come faster than if we borrow the same book from California. So we attempt to borrow it sort of more regionally, and the interface at WorldShare sort of helps us to do that a little bit. So that's mainly how we manage borrowing, but broadly it functions as a backstop for areas we can't collect in sufficient detail, or for journals that are prohibitively expensive. Those sorts of things are the main drivers of borrowing, I think.
And for us, we tend to stay within the SUNY system first. And if we can't fill things, then we start looking at New York, and then we look usually at the East Coast, and then we slowly move out from there just because of shipping costs. And if we can possibly limit to Empire Library Delivery, since our courier, that's all paid up front, we tend to use that as much as possible too.
And I just wanted to take a moment to welcome Ron Figueroa. Welcome, Ron. Thanks for joining us. And if you wanted to do a quick introduction, we did that in the beginning.
Hi, everybody. Apologies, I was a little bit late. There was a little situation I had to take care of. My name is Ronald Figueroa. I am the resource sharing manager at Syracuse University Libraries. I've been working here for 7 years, and my responsibilities are resource sharing, interlibrary loan, document delivery, physical delivery, course reserves, and a special service we have for alternate formats. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Did you have anything you wanted to add? I know you just joined us, but did you have anything to add for either the regional interlibrary loan or like outside of the region borrowing or lending?
So from our point of view, as an academic institution, in terms of borrowing, we try to serve everybody that needs something that we have, regardless if it's in New York or outside New York. So that's our lending, and we do have a lot of, we participate in different consortial groups to deal with costs and delivery time. In terms of borrowing, we also we rely on those agreements or those consortial groups mostly. We don't focus only on New York. We do focus on where we have a good service already, and also in places where we already have some type of agreement. So that's kind of like what we do, not just focusing on the regional area, but wherever we're going to be able to fulfill a request good with the best product and in the shortest time available. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, because again, yes, I joined a little bit late.
No, that's great. Thank you. It's a good insight, like that proximity and how long it will take, to get something is a big indicator of, working all that out ahead of time, is a good point. And for the regional ILL, I remember speaking with, like Megan in particular, regarding regional borrowing, but sometimes you just can't use the courier system because it just is going to take too long. So being aware of that sort of thing and communicating with, folks who are borrowing or lending, to make sure that you use the best resource in the most timely fashion. Megan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can. And as far as delivery times go, what we do, one of the things we cover in our interlibrary loan training is that we advise our librarians to stay within our own system first because they'll get those items faster because they'll go directly through our system courier. And then they can still use the courier for Oswego County schools, St. Lawrence Lewis schools, North Country Library System. But we explained to them that the items go through our courier and then they go through North Country Library System's courier. And so those items are going to take a little bit longer. We were using other systems beyond that for Champlain Valley School Library System, FEH BOCES School Library System, and our, I think it's CEFL library system. So we actually stopped using the courier for those because the items were taking up to a month to get there. So we actually changed our delivery versus mailing document back to mailing because items were taking so long to get there.
Yeah, because the steps involved require so many different transfer points and certain deliveries only happen at certain times. So yeah,
It'd be nice if we could use courier between those systems, but it was just taking the items too long to get there. So we went back to mailing because
right.
I mean, a month's a pretty long time because sometimes people need something right away.
So these are some of the resources that the group coordinated on to make aware that these are a lot of acronyms and things, but thanks to Morgan, she provided some insight as to like what exactly they are because we all love acronyms. So if you want to take a quick glance and if any of our panelists would like to talk more about any of them that they particularly enjoy or their usefulness in your work.
Yeah, I would say two of the biggest for us are ELVIS and IDS. So ELVIS stands for Libraries Very Interested in Sharing, and it's an international agreement between libraries that you'll lend things for free. Right now, due to the pandemic, we've kind of had to cut down on our lending and borrowing internationally as far as physical returnable items, but anything that's electronic, we're still working with anyone inside and outside of the country. And IDS, Information Delivery Services, again, that's another cooperative, mostly within New York State, that has agreed to lend for free.
I would add that ILIA, the resource sharing manager software, is a great tool. It's an amazing tool. It's basically a database where you could get all the requests that you were getting from other institutions and everything that you're sending to other institutions. But besides that, it gives you the many options to customize routing rules and customize the system in the way that is most useful for your institution. That is something that you could do regardless where you are, regardless if you're a net lender or a net borrower, you could customize it to fulfill your needs and the needs of your patrons. And just to add to what Morgan said about IDS, I will also add that IDS has the other side of the equation, which is not just the consortial group, but everything that they develop technologically, like the IDS logic, which allows requests to move faster and fulfill also articles through different services that they have, oh my God, I forgot the name right now. But there is the article gateway, and there are other services that they add within the different services that they have with Logic that allow articles to be fulfilled faster and requests to move faster through queues to deliver a faster product to patrons.
I'm seeing some questions in the chat. IDS is not just for electronic documents. IDS also has an agreement for physical items, books, and things as well. And let's see, do you have to be a member of Elvis and IDS to use them? There are agreements and there's a membership fee for IDS. There isn't a membership fee for Elvis, but you do have to agree to lend to anyone within Elvis. So that could be an issue if you can't lend to someone outside of the state or outside of the country.
Thanks, Morgan.
To just add, to elaborate slightly on Ron's talk about Iliad, we use WorldShare, which is sort of the like OCLC. It's the sort of step down OCLC product, and Iliad has all of the as you were saying, all of those features that help you manage a lot of requests automatically. But at an institution of our size, we don't need all of those features, and so it makes sense to have the less expensive platform to do more manual work, because it just makes sense for the scale we're operating at to have a person manage processes that would otherwise be managed by Iliad, because we're not overwhelmed by the volume. So that's a thing to think through about if you're, depending on how your institution operates. There's problems and solutions of scale that a lot of these things we're talking about do or don't apply if you're very, very small like us. You have a different set of problems than you guys do at larger places.
I just wanted to add that what I forgot about IDS, it's Alias. That is a service that it's ALIAIAS. Alias, and that is a service that for participating in libraries, the system will automatically check when there is a request for an article, which library owns that article electronically, and who could supply it faster. And that is one service that is amazing with IDS, because articles could be fulfilled really, really fast. So just wanted to add that.
Ron, if you have a second, can you throw that in the chat too? Because I already lost track of what the acronym was. Thank you.
I just looked it up.
Oh, you did? Okay,
while I
great.
was talking, so.
Because I'm
There
very
you go.
stuck in this window, so I apologize. I'm just like driving this presentation. Thank you everyone for all of that. And I did want to mention that our Due North regional catalog, while it's not like a borrowing and lending per se, it's a communication tool to locate regional resources. It does real-time searching of all the regional catalogs in the North Country. And so you can get a real-time look at what's available to you and sort of cherry pick who you would like to choose from. Which sort of goes into, I think, a future slide of developing rapport with certain institutions and being able to like kind of have an understanding of borrowing and lending. And so we'll get into that later, but I just also wanted to remind everyone of, Due North, and that that is the communication tool to find some regional resources as well. Working with data. So what are some helpful sort of data points that you all work with to understand like how well is interlibrary loan working, or what are we missing, or how does it supplement our collection and that sort of thing? And if you have any tips and tricks or workflows that really work for you and what your institution needs.
We ask a few interlibrary loan related questions as to how helpful it is on our annual survey. And then the other thing we watch is we watch for expired requests, because even though our Due North Insider systems send out email alerts, sometimes those get caught in spam folders or junk folders. So we try and monitor libraries to see if there's a particular library with a large number of expired requests. And then we can reach out to that library to see if maybe they aren't getting the emails. And a lot of times it has come down to that, where it wasn't a lack of the librarian paying attention to interlibrary loan. It's just that they thought they were getting the emails one day and not getting them the next. So we try and watch to see if anybody's getting a large number of expired and then we can contact them, because a lot of times it has been that the emails were getting caught in a spam or junk folder.
I'll mention real quick too that the communication bit within Due North, yes, is based on the email, and things always happen with email. But there's also an area where you can write notes within Due North, and you can make those private or public notes, which is really helpful for if you don't want to share too much patron info or anything like that. And so that's something to keep in mind just for the communication piece for everyone. Anyone else have any data that they really keep an eye on, borrowing lending ratios or that sort of thing?
One of the things we do, of course, we have annual reporting we do to ACRL and iPads on lending and borrowing as an academic library. And one of the things we've done to like go slightly further there to look at, we don't pay particular attention to our borrowing and lending ratios. We'd like them to be about even. But one of the things we look at is the borrowing per FTE, so that we can see how much the service is getting used and normalize that against our student population, which has varied over the last, well, forever. And so we've seen requests sort of decline, but then requests per FTE actually go up over the last 3 years. I have data for slightly, so that it's not normalizing for the number of students we have helps us get that better idea of whether the service is being used at the same level or less. And that helps us. It'll be interesting to see what this next year looks like as our enrollment has increased somewhat, to see whether our new class of freshmen sort of hears about ILL and is using it, or whether, and of course last year's data is just going to be a mess. So it'll be a little bit of a crapshoot, but that's the only thing we go sort of a little bit further than the basics that are required of us.
We create monthly reports for bibliographers so they could see what's being requested from our patrons. And there are different analyses by departments, by user type or status. It's also, we are a net lender. So for us, it's the radio between borrowing and lending is very important. And we always try to make sure that our lending is going to surpass our borrowing and keep a balance between charges and credits. So that's some of the aspects of the data that we take in consideration, and that to maintain that approach that the more you lend, the better options that you have, the better more doors that are open, and sooner or later you're going to need something from somebody that, since you have been a good lender to that institution, they're going to be they're going to be willing and more open to provide something special that one of our patrons might need. So those are just some of the aspects that we always keep an eye on data.
We look at a lot of those same data points too. We also look at like most requested journals to determine, maybe is this something that we should buy, or most requested books, should we buy it? We also look at, our request for undergraduates, graduates, and faculty and staff, just to see who's requesting the most and what they're requesting. We also, in Iliad, have the option to look at what their major is, self-reported, so we can see which departments maybe are using it more frequently. We also have in the past had issues with linking and things from different journals. So we pull reports on cancellation reasons, so we can see, okay, did we cancel because we don't own it? Did we cancel it because we couldn't access it? Things like that, so we can double check.
Before I lose track of it, there was a question in the chat. Is there a process whereby academic libraries can send an article to a public library or K-12 patron?
So we have received a few ALA requests. So their ALA has a form that you can fill out and email it to a library. And we've scanned things and sent those via email.
And that works regionally as well, as if you got, does it mostly happen regionally? Like you wouldn't get a request from a school, perhaps in Wisconsin. You would probably get a request from an Oswego, perhaps, school. Is that correct? Or
we've really only had a few in the 3.5 years I've been here.
Right. And it's interesting to think about data from the point of, Meg writes, people use that ALA form. Interesting. Yes. thinking about like you want people to use this resource, the ILL resource, but is there a point where it would become too much and like everything gets out of balance? Where do you see that sort of, where's that like tipping point as far as like you want people to use the resource, but it's too much? Or do you think that we'll get to that point ever? Or is that a problem?
I think when the usage doesn't justify the cost, I think when you're paying more for an ILL resource than you would be paying if you just bought the books you needed, then it's not worthwhile. But as long as there is a savings there, which there typically is, I think it's worthwhile. But you also have to consider manpower hours as well, and not just the cost of the ILL system.
Yeah, and I can see this like not with books, but with like especially articles because of the access now and the paywalls and things like that being a huge cost impact. Ron, sorry,
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that that is another aspect to link with data. Yes, we're still talking about data, but there's also the buy not borrow option in which you have to evaluate that maybe the ILL is gonna be more expensive than just getting the book, paying for the book once, and then having the book or the resource. So yeah, that's another aspect to look into data, and linking the whole conversation about that is that the as they said before me, sometimes it's cheaper just to get something rather than do an ILL several times. That's kind of like when you have that analysis is when you get to that justification to go one way or another. And when you see when you were asking about when is that tipping point that too much is too much, that's when you could take that decision based on the data and the numbers available, that it's better we just buy it or it's better we just keep doing an ILL.
Mila made a comment that the ALA form is often used by libraries who do not have access to WorldShare, OCLC, or other intermediary services. And I will mention too that like if you are unaware of what potential or possibilities are out there for you or your institution, like the best place to start would be like your librarian if you have one in the building, or your whoever your system is, like if it's a library, a public library system or a school library system, or obviously if you're an academic, going to your academic library. So those would be like the, like if you don't know where to start, like just start there. Any more points on data? Communication is a big thing for ILL since there are multiple organizations involved, multiple patrons and librarians and staff and people like that. And so what are your best tips for lines of communication? What is necessary in communicating with other borrowers or lenders? Anything else to add on that?
When I started in ILL almost 20 years ago, my very first day in the office, my supervisor at that time told me, here, you need to try to figure out what the patron is trying to tell you. And that is something that has helped me a lot because, yes, you get all sort of requests, and sometimes the patron doesn't have an idea what they're requesting. So having a good communication about not being afraid to ask the patron what is really needed, and try to also understand that in many cases patrons don't have an idea, and you are there just to also provide that help, even if that help is to send the patron to reference or do the extra mile to help to talk to reference first before they talk to the patron. So having a good communication with the patron, understanding what is needed is the base for this whole thing. And then once you have the idea, is having the communication, a good communication to where are you getting this from? Because that's the other part of the question, that you might have an idea, but probably it's not translated properly when using forms or using systems. And you have to make sure that the other institution will be able to understand what you're sending. And so that's the other part of communication that I would say is essential. Also from the lender point of view or lending point of view, yes, be able to communicate with the borrower with the borrower what is needed. Sometimes I during all these years, I've seen sometimes or heard comments that, well, if the borrower doesn't know what they're requesting is a problem. And I think that could be also part of our customer service, that even if we're a lender, we could probably go the extra mile, or just one simple email might change the whole thing, and it's gonna be easier for both sides and the patron, which is the fulfilling the patron needs is the whole thing of what we do every day.
I think that's all very well put. One example of the sort of confusion that we run into sometimes that I think you're getting at, Ronald, is like when a request comes in for something that's just a little bit strange, like a book chapter instead of a whole book. You know, they requested as an article, but it's a book chapter, or it's like a section of a conference proceedings. I think when you get into like the gray areas between like stuff that are obviously monographs and things that are obviously serials to patrons, then you end up needing, in instances like those, to do the sort of communication you're talking about.
Yeah, for us, we have to communicate with mostly, I would say, faculty and staff. We get some really interesting requests in foreign languages. And if it's, in a Romance language, we can usually plug it into Google Translate and get through. But sometimes we get requests for things in Russian, and I have to reach out to the faculty member and say, can you please translate this?
One example that I just like to add quickly is an experience that I had a long time ago when I was at the University of Miami. And there was a professor that used to request a lot of titles in Russian. And there was always this situation that the request will be for this specific article for this specific month and year. And we will send that, and then we always get the one thing. Until I was able to talk to somebody in North Carolina, and this librarian in North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, was Duke. She explained me that for science journals in Russian, usually the citation that we have here in the English translation is gonna be for the translated text, but the professor was requesting the original text. So she explained me that every time that there is a citation like that, we don't need to request what we're being requested. We need to request 1 year before. So for example, we were requesting July 10, 2004. We were supposed to submit the request as July 9, 2003, because the original in Russian was one thing, but the translation, which were the citations that were available here, were 1 year after, which is when the translation took place or was available. So that's an example of communication between the lender and the borrower, because we always had a situation until I found out that we were supposed to request it this other way.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everyone. We're sneaking into a future slide here of special cases. So I think that we can move on, except I did want to ask about the communication that you have with others regarding any like fees or charges or copyrights or things like that. Like what is your experience communicating that with lenders or borrowers rather?
In our case, we so seldom, have to pay to borrow something that we just, as the library, just, sometimes we'll let the person know that like, hey, this is hard to get and it's going to cost the library something. And it's happened so seldom that, we probably haven't spent $100 in the last couple of years to borrow stuff. So it's negligible. We just sort of let it come out from somewhere in our budget.
So we used to subsidize a lot of our requests without asking the patron or letting them know that it would cost. Because of the changing landscape due to COVID and other factors, we now communicate with our patrons way more frequently. So if it's a charge above a certain cost, we'll reach out and say, it's going to cost this much. Do you really need it? Do you really want it? And in a lot of cases, we've had people say, oh, no, never mind. I really don't need it that badly. I was just curious. Go ahead and cancel it. Using Iliad, when we're communicating with potential lenders, we have a setting that just says, we have a zero cost. So if you do charge something, please let us know. And if we decide we need to pay for something, we change that as we go and send it out to lenders within certain cost groups.
We do pay at Syracuse. Our max cost is $75 right now. The point is to try to help the patron as much as possible. If there's something special or something really expensive, then yes, we will talk to the patron to see if the item is actually needed. But we usually try to cover at least one part of the charge by having that $75 max cost. Most of our charges go through IFM, and that's the reason of the importance of being a net lender, because we always have credits in our favor. We don't have charges, or we're not in the red when we do the borrowing and lending. So that's one way that, yes, we're willing to pay for the patron, but at the same time, our lending is higher than the borrowing, and it helps us to cover costs.
Any other points of communication that you have that's important to your workflow?
One thing we haven't touched on, I don't think, is sort of inter-staff communication about, things as they come up, about determining internal stuff, about sort of policies, about, can we lend to this institution? Do we want to, this book's overdue from a borrower, either one of our borrowers or an institution that's borrowed our book, and how do we manage those? So that's a lot of what I do in ILL, is work with the staff member who manages day-to-day stuff on how often to follow up with patrons and institutions about sort of when things run a little more slowly than the defaults, and eventually like what to do about replacements and things like that.
And that actually segues nicely into our next slide, the code. The ALA code. And so who would like to speak to what this is all about?
So the Interlibrary Loan Code, I love this quote, more guidelines than rules. It's just kind of a set of, again, guidelines for interlibrary loan within multiple institutions. So it covers things like, as a lender, what are your responsibilities? As a borrower, what are your responsibilities? And one of the things that I know I kind of wanted to cover was, as a lending or a borrowing library, one thing that some people don't seem to be aware of is that once an item leaves the lending library, the borrower is responsible for it. So if it gets lost en route, you're still responsible for replacing it. And I know in some of our conversations before this, we had discussed that doesn't necessarily mean you have to pay for the item. I know in our case, we reached out to lending libraries and worked out deals, whether, we can buy a replacement, or maybe we can wait a little bit longer and see if it comes back from the patron.
As far as the cost goes among school libraries, a lot of times our schools will just work with each other and figure something out. But we're in a different boat than the academic libraries too. A lot of the items being requested by schools definitely aren't big ticket items. So a little paperback class set, if one or two of those books get lost, that we're not talking a big ticket item. So a lot of times our school libraries just are able to work something out amongst themselves and come to a solution that everybody agrees to.
We'll just say that the code provides the platform for the ILL business workflow to flow. Yes, guidelines. And as Morgan said, it touches different aspects of the ILL environment. What I would say is that it's important for everybody working in ILL to have an idea about the code, to read it and have an idea. Because yes, as you said, there are examples of libraries not understanding that once the item leaves the lending library, whatever happens to the item is a responsibility of the borrower. There are other areas as well that are important to keep in mind. There's an area, for example, about ILL and reserves that is addressed in the code. So it's important to have a clear idea. And also, the other part of this is that to understand that we're talking about the code for the American Library Association. So it's the code that applies to the United States. We do have business with Canada. Canada has its own code. Germany has its own code. And there are different things. So it's also important to keep in mind that we're talking about our code. Most of our businesses might be here in the United States, but eventually if we need to get out of the US or something coming outside the US, there might be other rules that could apply, and always have an open mind to know that it's not just that the code, our code is gonna cover everybody outside the world, because that's not the case.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Ron. I know when I first started, I ended up working with a couple libraries in Germany, and I didn't realize these articles I was requesting they couldn't legally fill. They have some interesting rules around newspaper articles around World War II that you have to actually physically go in person. They can't send you copies. I had no idea.
I guess we can move on. We're getting close to the top of the hour here. So anything else about the code, feel free to interrupt, but we will move on to the next slide, which we've touched on a little bit with special cases, borrowing items in different languages and all that entails, like Ron was talking about. But also, are there any other special cases that would be helpful to know about or understand that this does happen in the interlibrary loan world?
I would just add to what Moran was just saying in the previous slide about Germany, that we talk about the code, but there's also copyright. And the copyright law that we know is, and we follow, it's the US law. Again, Canada has its own copyright law, Germany has its own copyright law. So it's important to keep in mind that there are special cases in which the copyright that is not the one that is actually being applied, because the transaction is coming or is going to another institution. And there's going to be the case in which, depending on who's the lender and who's the borrower, one law might be applied at one end of the equation, and another copyright could be applied to the other side of the equation. So it's something that might sound complicated, but it's just the point of being aware that there are other documents, other laws, other codes that are also playing a role in what we do every day.
This would be the part where I also made a note that we were gonna just mention the digital sort of article borrowing lending. I think that's where we had popped this. If anyone wants to just do a brief, like, this is a thing that we're exploring, but we're not there yet, speak more to that topic, that would be great.
For us at Syracuse, we're exploring. We're not there yet, but we're exploring options, and we're exploring how things are moving and observing.
Yeah, we're working with a couple different groups, and we're still in the very, very early stages of looking at controlled digital lending for items that we own, just for our patrons, as well as how we would handle things like ebooks with other institutions. Again, all very much so in like the baby stages.
Right, and it'll be interesting understanding how this fits in with like the future of, we're going more and more digital. We're having these programs online, like we have more and more ebooks. Like, when is that going to like translate more easily into the interlibrary loan world? Andrew?
Just very briefly, I think that we're sort of even further away from doing much with digital lending than the other two academic libraries here. We just, like, as a blanket, will say we're not sure as far as our licensing goes, even if, as far as what things we have, monographs at least, that we could lend or not lend parts of. It's just been a can of worms we've chosen not to open, because we'd have to like double check the licensing and keep track of that in a way that's too more time consuming than we have the staff bandwidth for at the moment.
Yeah, we don't do any digital lending of articles, just because the licensing of the school-based databases is typically for that school only, is typically what our licensing is for. However, we do we do have a coordinated cooperative collection development, and we do have that with ebooks. And so when purchasing ebooks, they have to be shared when we're doing that through coordinated cooperative collection development. So we actually offer so our biggest ebook platform right now is Sora, which is owned by Overdrive. So our books, our school libraries can actually purchase ebooks through Sora, and then after a set amount of time that we determine, then they go up into the shared collection. So they get like a month of exclusive access, and then they go up into the shared collection. And that's just shared. Our shared Sora collection is just our system.
Similarly, the network provides an overdrive for academics. Paul Smith's is one of the members, but those purchases go directly into the pool and are available to those participating academic libraries and schools, which is a great resource, and it's exciting to see that sort of happening across the state. There was another special cases instance. Oh, I was going to mention, and we're not going to get into this because it's a whole other thing. OER as a potential for like alleviating some textbook type things or other types of things. So throw that out there, but we will talk about that another time because that is another interesting aspect to providing resources to folks. And so we'll go on to our last slide, which is just opening it up to any questions or if any of the panelists have any follow-ups that they've thought of throughout. And please, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll buy us some time here and just say thank you again for everyone for coming. I hope this has proven to be somewhat helpful to you in whatever capacity you work with interlibrary loan. And if you have any follow-up questions that you are unsure of, please feel free to reach out to myself and I can pass those along to others that might know more. You can find my contact information online, but I'll also pop it in the chat for fun. Any panelists have anything else to add? Yes, Melissa, I can send the yes, I will send that out. I will send that out to everyone in the email, the transcript and the slides also, and we'll make those edits too to add a couple more things. So yes. But thank you to the panelists for providing your insight. It's very valuable information. Thank you. Otherwise, it's pretty quiet. I think we could probably say goodbye. Have a great rest of your day, and everyone be safe and stay well.